She was sitting at a desk in eastern Massachusetts when she first started dreaming about Alaska. Not hiking in it, not visiting it, living in it, full-time, off the grid, dependent on what the land provided. At the time, that idea was so far from her actual life that she and her husband both laughed it off. They lived in an apartment. They knew nothing about hunting, foraging, building, or surviving a winter without a heating bill. Amy worked as a company secretary in a fishing business. Her husband Dennis worked as a lobsterman for the same company, which happened to be run by his father-in-law. Neither of them had grown up on a farm, raised livestock, or spent significant time in wilderness. That is the starting point of this story. And it matters, because what Amy Westerlind eventually became, and where she eventually ended up, looks almost nothing like where she began. By 2025, she was making moose chili from an animal her family had hunted, fermenting vegetables she had foraged, mixing herbal medicine from plants she had learned to identify by name, and doing all of it from a small off-grid log cabin near the northern entrance of Wrangell St. Elias National Park, one of the most remote corners of the North American continent. The nearest substantial grocery store required a round trip of 6 hours by road. Supply runs to Anchorage took 17 hours. The Holdfast Alaska YouTube channel, which Amy and Dennis launched in September 2024, reached 52,000 subscribers in under a year. That growth surprised them both. It was faster than either had anticipated, built almost entirely on word of mouth and the raw authenticity of what they were showing. Not curated homesteading aesthetics, but actual subsistence living, with all the difficulty that comes with it. But here is what most people who discovered Holdfast Alaska in 2024 or 2025 never knew. The channel only exists because of a sequence of decisions that started more than a decade earlier in a small apartment near Boston. And the biggest transformation in the entire story was not the move to Alaska. It was what Amy had to become to survive it. The first decision that set everything in motion happened around 2008 or 2009, and it looked almost comically small at the time. Amy started a garden on the patio of their Massachusetts apartment. Tomatoes in pots, a few herbs. Nothing about it suggested a future of subsistence hunting in sub-zero temperatures. But that patio garden became the first physical expression of something both she and Dennis had started feeling. A growing restlessness with suburban life, and a pull towards something more self-sufficient. They started spending every free weekend driving to Maine, walking through woods, looking at cheap land listings. Dennis stopped getting haircuts. They stopped going to restaurants. Every extra dollar went into savings. When they had accumulated $5,000, they found an old-timer willing to sell on a handshake and a down payment. 30 overgrown acres in western Maine, with no electricity, no running water, and no infrastructure of any kind. Their families told them not to do it. They did it anyway. In March 2011, Dennis and Amy moved onto that property and began living in a tent. They cooked over campfires. They bathed using water from a freshwater spring. They had no internet. Over the following months, they built a small cabin by hand, cleared acres of trees, dug a well, and established pasture. Neither of them had done any of this before. What happened to Amy specifically during those years in Maine is one of the details that gets overlooked when people talk about Holdfast Alaska. While Dennis farmed and took on odd jobs to generate income, Amy trained as an herbalist. She learned how to identify, harvest, and use medicinal plants. She studied preservation, fermentation, and herbal medicine, skills she would eventually bring to Alaska and then teach to hundreds of thousands of viewers. The herbalist training was not a hobby, it was income. It was how she contributed to a household that had deliberately removed itself from the conventional economy. That decision, to develop a real, marketable skill rooted in the land, became one of the defining threads of who Amy is on camera years later. The connection between that Maine cabin and the Holdfast Alaska channel is more direct than most viewers realize. By 2019, the Westerlind's daughter Lena was born at home in the Maine cabin. Within a year, the family made a decision that surprised almost everyone who knew them. They sold the 30-acre homestead they had spent 8 years building from nothing. Then they bought a farmhouse on 50 acres outside of Farmington, Maine, started a community-supported agriculture garden for income, bought a milk cow, and continued building toward their longer-term goal. That goal had always been Alaska, a place they had talked about since their apartment days in Massachusetts, but had never actually visited. That detail matters. When Dennis and Amy left for Alaska in November 2020, they had never set foot there. The destination they were betting everything on was entirely imagined. They drove 3,200 miles to Bellingham, Washington, with Lena in the back seat, loaded everything onto a ferry, and headed north through the northern Pacific. The crossing took 5 days. There were 36-foot seas. Dennis, who had spent years working on commercial fishing boats, described it as different from anything he had experienced on the water before. When they arrived in Alaska, it was the start of winter, and Amy later said that was actually the smarter approach. Getting the full force of an Alaskan winter immediately, without time to ease in, meant there was no illusion of what they were dealing with. The sun did not rise until 10:30 in the morning. By 3 in the afternoon, it was dark again. They purchased a 2-acre homestead on the outskirts of the Kenai National Wildlife Refuge. There, they fished for salmon, hunted moose, and spent several years learning the specific rhythms of coastal Alaska. They participated in a goat herd share arrangement and worked in local real estate to generate income. The Kenai Peninsula gave them their first genuine Alaskan experience, but Dennis eventually put it plainly: it was too crowded, too much like Maine. They were looking for something more remote, more unforgiving, more real. What changed in spring 2024 is the moment that Holdfast Alaska became what it is today. And the moment that Amy's role in the story shifted most significantly. The family paid cash for a small, off-grid log cabin on 7 acres near the northern entrance of Wrangell-St. Elias National Park. It is the largest national park in the United States, larger than the entire country of Switzerland, and their property sits near its northern boundary. In a part of Alaska where the infrastructure is essentially non-existent, their location falls within a legally designated subsistence zone. A subsistence zone is a defined area of Alaska where the state's lack of services and the genuine remoteness of the population means residents are permitted to harvest substantially more from the land than in other parts of the state. The difference between the Kenai Peninsula and where the Westerlinds live now is not marginal. On the Kenai, they were permitted to dip net and keep 45 sockeye salmon per year for their family. In the subsistence zone near Slaina, they are allowed 500. Hunting seasons begin earlier. Permitted harvests for moose, deer, bear, and porcupine are considerably higher. For a family whose stated goal has always been to live off the land entirely, that legal framework makes the goal achievable in a way the Kenai simply could not. The property comes with genuine isolation alongside those expanded rights. Supply runs to Anchorage, takes 17 hours round trip. There are no reliable emergency services nearby. Wolves have appeared near the river they use for water. Bears have gotten into their chicken coop. Summer forest fires have burned in the surrounding area. Their mailing address is a P.O. box in Slaina, Alaska, the nearest community to their remote land. This is the environment in which Amy Westerlind now works, raises her daughter, and teaches. Every video she produces about canning, herbal medicine, fermented vegetables, or wilderness foraging comes from a place where those skills are not optional. They are how the family eats and stays healthy without consistent access to a pharmacy or a grocery store. The YouTube channel launched in September 2024, a few months after the move inland. The starting equipment was a GoPro. There was no production team, no scripted content plan, no editing studio. Dennis later described it simply: they bought a camera and started filming themselves working on the homestead. People found them. The growth to 52,000 subscribers in under a year came not from algorithm manipulation or viral moments, but from a consistent stream of content that showed things most homesteading channels deliberately avoid. Building an A-frame chicken coop with a living grass roof designed specifically to insulate against extreme cold. Processing wild-caught salmon using a traditional no-power preservation method that relies only on sun, smoke, and wind. A technique the Westerlinds learned on the Kenai. Teaching viewers how to make sourdough donuts, lacto-fermented pickles, and moose chili from animals the family hunted themselves. Amy's contribution to the channel has always been distinct from Dennis's. He handles the heavier construction work and documents the hunting. She brings the kitchen, the herbalism, the food preservation, and the teaching. Her stated goal from the start was to make the channel a place where people could genuinely learn, not just observe. Canning, foraging, herbal medicine. These are not skills she picked up for the camera. They are skills she built over years of necessity, beginning in that Maine cabin before YouTube was any part of the plan. There is one detail about the channel that most viewers do not immediately notice. Lena, their daughter, does not appear on camera. The Westerlinds made a deliberate decision not to show her face, citing safety as the reason. She is present in many videos. Her voice can be heard in the background, small and enthusiastic, but her image is protected. In a channel built on radical transparency about a genuinely hard life, that one boundary is quietly firm. What is also worth noting is that the brand name Holdfast Alaska did not begin with a YouTube channel. Their Instagram and Facebook presence were established as early as 2014, during the later years of their main operation. The YouTube channel in September 2024 was the most public expression of something that had been building for a decade. There is a contradiction at the center of the Holdfast Alaska story that takes a moment to register. Amy Westerlind grew up in the suburbs of New England. She met Dennis shortly after high school, and they moved into an apartment near Boston together. She worked a desk job in a fishing company's office. She had no background in wilderness survival, animal husbandry, foraging, construction, or herbalism. She was not raised in a homesteading family. She had not grown up hunting, or preserving food, or building things with her hands. The woman who now demonstrates traditional salmon preservation methods, mixes herbal remedies from foraged plants, ferments vegetables, and raises a child in one of the most isolated corners of the continent, is not a different person, but she is a deeply different version of that person. Every skill Amy has today was acquired deliberately, one at a time, often under financial pressure. The herbalism came from the Maine years, when the family needed income, and the land was what they had. The canning and fermentation came from necessity. Without consistent refrigeration or reliable supply runs, preservation is not a hobby. It is how food survives the winter. The knowledge of wild plants and foraging deepened as each location grew more remote. None of it arrived as a package. All of it was built. What is unusual about her trajectory is not simply that she changed. People who make dramatic life decisions often change. What is unusual is how systematic the change was. Every phase of the Westerlind story produced a specific skill or a specific body of knowledge that carried directly forward into the next phase. Nothing was discarded. The tomatoes on the Massachusetts patio led to the Maine garden, which created the conditions for herbalism training, which led to deeper food preservation knowledge, which is now central to what she teaches on Holdfast Alaska. Amy made this point directly in an interview. The channel's purpose is to give viewers what she once needed herself, a demonstration that a radically different way of living is actually achievable, built one decision at a time, not all at once, not without difficulty, but achievable. Dennis made the same point from a different angle. If they had listened to everyone who told them not to buy land in Maine, they would not have developed the foundation that made Alaska possible at all. The question the title of this video asks is what happened to Amy Westerlind after Holdfast Alaska changed forever? The honest answer is that she became the reason the channel works. Holdfast Alaska changed when the family moved from the Kenai Peninsula to the eastern interior in spring 2024. That move completed a transition that had been building for over a decade, from coastal Alaska, which felt too similar to Maine, to genuine wilderness subsistence living in a federally designated zone where the rules exist precisely because normal supply chains do not reach. After that move, the YouTube channel launched. After the channel launched, Amy's dual role, off-grid homesteader and on-camera educator, became its most consistent draw. Viewers who arrived for the scenery stayed for the skills. The herbal medicine content, the cooking from hunted and foraged ingredients, the canning tutorials, all of it comes from someone who built that knowledge over 15 years and now passes it forward without softening it. As of 2025, the channel remained active and continuing to grow. Their cabin sits on 7 acres in what they have publicly described as the wildest place they have ever lived. And they have lived in some genuinely wild places. There are no property taxes on their land. They get their water from a local river. They have encountered wolves near that same river. Amy described it with the same matter-of-fact tone she brings to everything else on the channel. What happened to Amy Westerlind is not a story of crisis or departure. It is a story of sustained, deliberate transformation, the kind that only becomes visible when you step back far enough to see the whole arc. A desk in Massachusetts, a patio garden, a tent in Maine, a 30-acre homestead built by hand over 8 years, a ferry ride through 36-foot seas with a 1-year-old in the back seat, 4 years on the Kenai, and finally, a 7-acre property near Wrangell, St. Elias, a GoPro camera, and a channel that reached 52,000 subscribers in less than 12 months. She has said the channel's goal is to provide value, to teach people who want a similar life, and to inspire people who don't. What she has not said outright is that the channel is also the clearest documentation of what it took for her to get there. Every skill she teaches is one she needed first. Amy Westerlind's story does not follow the arc most people expect. There was no single breaking point, no dramatic departure, or public crisis. There was a long chain of deliberate choices, most of them made against the advice of people who cared about them, that gradually built a life almost nobody would have predicted from the starting point. A secretary in a fishing company office, with $5,000 in savings, a patio of tomato plants, and a handshake deal on 30 overgrown acres in western Maine. As of 2025, she and Dennis continue uploading from their cabin in the Alaskan interior near Slana. The channel remains active. Lena continues to be raised in one of the most remote places on the continent, and according to her parents, handles the cold better than either of them. Amy continues to teach canning, foraging, herbal medicine, and wilderness cooking to an audience that has grown far beyond what she expected when she and Dennis pointed a GoPro at themselves and pressed record. The skills she teaches are the same skills that kept the family functional through every phase of this story. It turns out there is a large audience for that kind of knowledge, and perhaps an even larger audience for proof that starting from scratch with no relevant background is not actually an obstacle. Here is the question worth sitting with. If the only thing standing between you and a completely different life was a willingness to start small, live in a tent, and ignore the people telling you it was a bad idea, would you have taken that first step?